for joining in and for clicking in. It's really good to see so many faces and so many people attending. So I'm Dr. Anthony Newton. I'm a counseling psychologist. So for me, neurodiversity has always been in my life. I have a sister who is autistic. She's 11 years older than me. It's her birthday today. Happy birthday to her. Must shout that out. So neurodiversity for me has always been literally my personal life. I've grown up with it. I've grown up around it. I've seen how it can impact and shape people's lives, really. So I think it's very, very fair to say that she's inspired me in terms of my career as a psychologist, but also, I guess, in terms of my life and my career, so I've always been interested in people and understanding why people do the things that we do. And that includes myself, actually, understanding myself better. So that's why I sort of chose psychology. So in terms of my sort of clinical background, so I've worked in public health in the NHS in the UK, for a very long time, for about 13 years or so, in different capacities. And I've worked with different presentations, so common mental health difficulties like anxiety, depression, panic attacks, phobias, so very, very, very common parts of being a human, I guess. And I've worked in more sort of complex services, so people who might have personality disorders, diagnosis, or complex emotional needs, or they might hear voices. So I've seen a real range of people in my career. And in my private life, I sort of have a private practice. So I see people one-to-one and I supervise, but I specialize in law and media sectors, specifically television. So I guess my role at Unmind really is a psychologist. So I sort of make sure that everything is clinically good. I guess what we're putting out is all clinically viable. I ensure clinical safety. I produce content for Unmind. I write different bits and pieces. But my passion is about thinking how digital technologies can be used to shape people's lives and improve people's lives for the better. I think that's enough from me. Yeah, so good to see everybody. Thanks for clicking in again.
Great. Thanks for sharing, Anthony. Before I ask Sash and Theo to introduce themselves as well, just to let all of you know that you can obviously ask questions throughout this webinar. And probably the best way to do it is to use the little Q&A box. And I'm sure there'll be a bunch of questions that come through, but we will look through those and try and select a few key themes that are coming through and then dedicate some time towards the end to ask our panel to answer your questions. So I just thought I would mention that as well. Okay, so thanks again, Anthony, for sharing. So Sasha, could you please introduce yourself and perhaps talk about your own journey with neurodiversity and why you believe it's so critical that we raise awareness in our workplaces?
Absolutely. So I was probably the last person that ever expected to be talking about myself as neurodiverse. I grew up in a world where ADHD was very much something you link to hyperactive little boys, and I was a overachieving, very well-behaved female. And there have been things over the course of my life that have plagued me, which I never paid much mind to. Very messy, very disorganized, don't focus in the same way as other people, lose a lot of things. And I never really thought of it much of it, apart from it was just part of my personality. And then as I got older, I had very high pressured jobs with a lot of crisis management around them, always excelled in that, worked very well under pressure. And then as I was in my late 30s, it was about a year ago, and I was watching of all things, a TikTok, and it talked about ADHD, and I just thought, oh my gosh, this is me. Didn't think too much, did a little bit more research in true ADHD style, didn't actually do anything about it. And then I was talking to a therapist about something completely unrelated, and she said, it sounds like you have ADHD. Oh, well, that's interesting. Still didn't do anything about it. She did an assessment on me. It came out, yes, you definitely do. And then I moved into a new job, and the job was no longer high pressure. I needed to be self-motivated. I needed attention to detail, all the things that throughout my career, I had just thought, well, this is just not what I'm good at. And I loved the job, and I wanted to be in the job. And I realized that I maybe needed to address these issues if it was indeed ADHD. So went and got myself diagnosed. It was completely life-changing in terms of the perspective that I have on myself and understanding the way my brain works. But it was got medicated also, which made a difference. But I didn't at that point speak up to my manager, because I felt like I was saying, so you've hired me, but by the way, I'm a bit flawed. you've been missold a product almost. So I didn't speak up, and then it was just coming to the point where I was getting a lot of feedback about things that I know are my downfall. And I have a fantastic boss, and she's so transparent and so understanding, and I spoke up, and it just empowered me to be able to be more authentic at work, to seek tools to help me, and to explain myself better to her, I think. So that's why I'm so happy to be here today, because it's this, and that's why it's so close to my heart.
Thank you so much, Sasha. I mean, you mentioned quite a few things there, which I know we're going to dig into more in this conversation, but even just hearing you speak there, I think already that can be so empowering for people. So thank you for sharing. Theo, so we're also eager to find out a bit more about you and your story. And so please introduce yourself and also tell us about the contributions you've made to this field through your work, your podcast, and your other work, including, I know that you're also starring in our neurodiversity content that we've just launched. So we'd love to hear more from you.
Brilliant, thank you. So just on the point that Sasha made, before I even start, 22 billion views of the hashtag ADHD at the beginning of this year on TikTok, right? 12 months before, it was 11 billion, right? That's 11 billion views in 12 months, right? Whether I've seen comments saying, oh, is it negative content or is it factual? Whatever it is, right? It's triggering for people. That means it matters, right? And that it positively and negatively affecting people in different ways, but it means that it matters. And I think that's really important and why we're here today. So I am the author of Neurodiversity at Work, accidental author. I'm dyslexic. I still can't read and write properly. No lie, I really do struggle. And I bombed out of school. I bombed out of college. Oh, I'm getting onto the negatives already. Probably wouldn't do that. Positives, I speak globally. I'm a consultant and advisor. I'm a HR professional, over 15 years. By accident more than design, many of these things. Something happened when I was a young person. I got into a lot of trouble, had a lot of problems. I bombed out of school. I took about 5 GCSEs, where most people took about 12. I was already disconnecting myself from typical society. But on the other hand, my mum got me into drama, community theatre. That was my therapy. So on the one side of it, I was being revered. I was being championed. I was being talked about as being incredible. On the other side of it, I was not turning up to school. But I wasn't stupid. I'd turn up and get my mark in the morning, and then I'd go off, and then I'd come back and get my mark in the afternoon, and then I'd go off again. But I'd still drop in on the subjects that I like drama and English, right? The things that allowed me to either express myself or to be the other person that I felt comfortable being, right? And that was really important for me. So in a bizarre kind of way, 5 years ago, I sat in a room and heard the term neurodiversity. At that point, I'd been diagnosed with dyslexia at 21. And it wasn't until my late 30s, through the lens of my daughter, that I realized there was other stuff going on in my head. And the realization that co-occurrence was a thing, and that I could be dyslexic, ADHD, and autistic, and who knows what else, all at once. And that was like a boom moment. And it's at that point I wanted to make a difference. And I realized the difference that I could make was through my community, and my community was HR and talent acquisition leaders, because I was a member of many groups within the UK and some European groups. So that's what I did. And that's where the book was born from. That's where my consultancy advisory work was born from. And that's where I've utilized my skills now to educate, support others. It now all over the place, governments, universities, organizations. The thing has just taken off. And yeah, so really pleased to be here. Thank you for getting me involved.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Theo. You know, you're doing fantastic work, and your passion for this is evident. Looking forward to hearing more from you as we talk more about this. You stressed there just how this matters, and I mean those TikTok stats were quite something. Wow. I think what's important, and maybe even just for this conversation, is that we all get on at least some degree of common understanding of what neurodiversity means. And it may be a question that's on people's minds, right? So, Anthony, could you tell us a bit about the different types of neurodivergent conditions, including common triggers and symptoms, and perhaps also to speak a bit about terminology?
Yeah, sure. I mean, before I get on to that, I just want to say thank you to both my fellow panelists for sharing your experiences, actually. And hearing how you have used your own experiences in the world in a slightly different way, how you've taken what you've gone through and how you've transmuted that into a passion. So it was really inspiring to sort of hear. So thank you for sharing those. So in terms of neurodiversity itself, what it means, I mean, the word comes from neurological diversity, and it's been combined to neurodiversity. But when we think of neurology, neurological, we think of neurology. So neurology means the way our brains are wired, the way we think, the way we're able to sort of take in information, process that information, communicate that information out to the world around us. That's what we think of neurology. So the diversity element is that there's a range in how we do that. There's a range in how we think, how we interpret information, how we process information, how we communicate that information out into the world. So we don't all think and learn and process information in the same way, believe it or not. But historically, there was that view, and there was a view that there was one way to think, more or less. And if you didn't think in those ways, then you were wrong. Basically, you were wrong somehow, and yeah, you were sort of disordered, let's say. And the emphasis was about fixing. So it went on to a sort of fixing sort of approach to neurodiversity. So now we have a bit more understanding, actually, that neurodiversity simply means that there's a diversity in the ways that human brains can function, learn, think, and relate to others effectively. So yes, so while that is the case, that is true, it's also important that for some people with or without a diagnosis, their neurodivergence can have more difficulty in the world. They can have more issues because the world may not have been set up to fully support them or to even understand kind of what their experiences might be. So I guess in this context, we're speaking about sort of workplace, but I guess there could be other contexts like university or home or social life. People have different experiences there. So as you mentioned at the beginning, Steve, so 1 in 7 of us will have a neurodivergent condition. So something maybe diagnosable, perhaps. And so it's not to say that conditions like dyslexia, autism, or dyspraxia don't exist. It's just saying that how we, as a society, as a world, as a culture, we need to sort of view them differently. And we need to sort of, and it needs to be anticipated and accepted rather than being considered inferior or disordered, basically. It's just a part of human expression, a part of how we all think differently. Like emotions, there's a range of different emotions. So I'll talk about some common different conditions that might show up in the workplace. Again, it's not to sort of put people in boxes. And as Thea mentioned, different people can have different bits of different things. But I'll talk about 3 things very broadly. And, you know, feel free, others, to sort of chip in and jump in if I miss anything specific. But I'll speak about dyslexia, I'll speak about autism, and I'll speak about ADHD. Again, very briefly. I don't want to turn it into a lecture. And if anything, I think all of those presentations could have a whole webinar on themselves, to be honest. But I'll start with dyslexia. So dyslexia is a learning difficulty that obviously affects sort of reading and spelling, and it affects about 10% of the population, basically. So what I'll do, just for time's sake, I'll think about how dyslexia could show up in the workplace, because obviously that's why we're here. It's about how how's neurodiversity, how does it manifest in the workplace? So what are some of the possible challenges? And then later on in the presentation, I'll speak at what we can do about it. So some of the possible challenges, obviously, that we could imagine with dyslexia is a lot of reading and writing that can take place in work, so on screen, on paper. And reading and writing is a fundamental part of most people's jobs. So yeah, reading emails, notices, reports, letters, websites, you name it. So someone with dyslexia, they might have difficulty sort of reading what is presented to them, and it might be very time consuming for them compared to others who might not have dyslexia. Again, there might also be some issues around personal organization, and people's working memory might also be a problem in the workplace, especially where there's an emphasis to work independently or to meet deadlines. And then obviously if you struggle with deadlines, then that could be quite a challenge. And again, because dyslexia is a hidden disability, So others in the team might perceive people as ineffective in some way, which might lead to some frustration for the dyslexic person, or they might face some discrimination as well. So that's just a very broad overview. Again, if people want to jump in and offer more, then please do. I'll move on to autism, or autism spectrum conditions, as we can call it as well. So autism is a lifelong developmental disability that affects how people perceive the world and how they interact with others around them. So I guess there's two main areas that autism can affect people with. So there's difficulties with social interaction and communication. So the ability to sort of, be in a social world, eye contact, how cues, when to speak, when not to speak. All of these things can generate quite a lot of anxiety in someone on the autistic spectrum. So again, I don't want to say autistic people in general. Obviously, everyone experiences the world differently, but they can literally see, hear, and feel the world in very, very different ways. So sensory, on a sensory level, things can be quite overwhelming. And this can cause, again, a lot of stress and anxiety. So, like I said, we're all on a spectrum, and people experience things differently. But there are some positive characteristics as well. So people could be data-driven, analytical, good at detail. All of these things are very good in the workplace, actually. There's a place for all of these things if we know how to think about it and know how to use those skills, but also make space for people to be themselves at work and increase understanding, basically. So again, some challenges at work I'll speak about very briefly. So overstimulation, if you're working in an office, for example, lighting, bright lights everywhere, that could be quite intense for some people. Noise, people might want to sort of reduce noise levels, crowds, open plan offices, all of these things can make it quite challenging for someone with autism. Again, finding social interaction is quite difficult. So meetings or post-meetings or socials, that could be a challenge for them and they might decline. So office politics might be a bit of a mystery to some autistic individuals. And again, maybe some people with autism, they might prefer clarity and openness rather than, opaqueness and vagueness. I think it's also important to touch on sort of gender differences in autism very briefly. Again, I know that we could have a whole webinar on each of these topics, but historically, autism was often seen as a sort of male presentation. And a lot of the sort of clinical trials was done mostly on men. And I guess it's more sort of contemporarily is seen that women obviously do have autism, and the percentage of women having autism might be the same as men, effectively. And also women might express themselves differently. They might show more emotion than men, or they might mask more again. So it can be missed, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. In women, we might look out for it as much as we would do in men, but it still exists. So it's just to sort of touch on that and just to acknowledge that there have been sort of historical differences. And lastly, I'll touch on ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I think this has got a lot of buzz. I think, as Sasha said, there's much more discourse and conversation in the world, in the public sphere. It's much more in our consciousness, and people are becoming more aware of what ADHD can look like for them and how it can impact on their lives. But just some common symptoms. Again, I don't want to put people in a box. But it's about inattention, so difficulty in focusing on tasks, being forgetful, making careless mistakes, perhaps. And there could be a hyperactivity element to it. So being quite restless, fidgeting, hard to stay seated, impulsive. And again, if you think of an office environment, a lot of it is all about trying to neutralize things to some degree. And actually there might be someone who has a bit more energy in the room, and there could be some conflict there. So some further challenges is just that restlessness, distraction. People with ADHD might be bored more easily compared to their peers. And especially if the work is not stimulating or not particularly exciting, then they might be more restless. So organization and planning and time management could be difficult. And yeah, time management and memory could also play a part in the ability to do their work to the best of their abilities. And there also might be some social issues at work, you know, because there is this excess energy, they might that might spill out to other people who might be more quieter or might need a bit more focus in their jobs effectively. So I'll pause there so you can digest all of that. Like I say, it's such a big topic, but I hope you sort of have a flavor of some of these issues and how they could show up at work. And hopefully there might be more time to sort of address different bits and pieces, but I'll pause there for now and hand back to Steve.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Anthony. I mean, I found it very useful and helpful. I'm sure other people did as well. And it's really important that we do better understand this topic, which I think will make it easier for us to talk more openly about it, you know, especially then for someone who might be historically marginalized by neurodiversity. So really important to understand the common signs and symptoms and triggers like you mentioned. But Theo, based on your experience, you know, or perhaps your own experience or knowing about other people's experiences, how often do people actually mask their signs and symptoms, especially within the workplace? Is that a common thing?
Absolutely. It's really interesting. The chat is lighting up. Any manager who wants to know more about neurodiversity, read the chat. I mean, it's difficult because you should be concentrating on what we're saying as well, right? But it's fascinating. It's incredible. Wow. And what I want to say is this has come up many times in the chat. It's around the connection between trauma in childhood as a young person and then into adulthood and the connection with ADHD. There's also lots around synesthesia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia or DCD, and co-occurrence. Yes, you're more likely to have more than one, and that string could go many and often. You're also more likely to have suffered with anxiety or other traits, conditions, or impacting factors that are interlinked. And Anthony will probably tell you some more about this, right? But so yes to all of those questions, there is commonality there. In terms of the masking, for me, when I was in school, because I struggled to spell, because I struggled to hold a pen, but you'll continue to ask to do it, that creates trauma, right? So I didn't connect the trauma with that as an adult until more recently. So, for example, I couldn't say my name properly. I say Theo instead of Theo. So everybody thought that was really funny. I couldn't hold a pen. I couldn't write. I still can't hold the pen properly today. So I can't write properly. So I can't write at speed. So I struggle. I get hand cramps. And that's why computer and technology is so powerful for me. But because of that trauma that happened in school, now I can sit around a board table with senior leaders and board members, which I do, advising on neurodiversity and neuro-inclusion or recruitment in general. And if I'm asked to write on the board, no word of a lie, I start to sweat profusely. I panic. I go into a state of shock, fight or flight, because I know I'm going to embarrass myself in front of these people. And just a feeling of they're going to laugh at me. Now, they may not laugh at me, but it doesn't matter because that trauma, that's in my brain. The connection is there and it happens in that moment. Now, think about, I know there's going to be loads of people lighting up that this connects with them. Think about all the things that put you into fight and flight position, right? Now try and think back through that life journey to where those things may have happened as a young person. If you can start to connect those, you may do it through support of a coach, a mentor, or whatever, or you may be able to do it with support of a partner or by writing down yourself that journey. But you'll start to see the connecting pieces. That's where you can start to heal in some respects, or at least understand this sweating comes from somewhere. Maybe I can stand up and make a joke about it, and maybe that's going to, reduce some of the stress and anxiety around that situation. And we think about so many comedians that get up who may be ADHD or autistic, right? Who are brilliant. They go into their fight or flight on stage, and they make jokes of some of those situations. So masking is what we do from a very early age to hide some of that. We realize that we get bullied, we get laughed at, teachers may clip us across the back of the head. I've heard people in other parts of the world who get beaten, who get shamed as part of their community, of their family. So this masking happens often at a very early stage, and then it comes right through into that moment when you walk in wherever, And it affects our relationships, it affects the way we deal with our friendships, our communities, it affects how we deal with business, our partners, our stakeholders, the lot, right? And it is a trigger, and it just happens physiologically, emotionally, neurologically, boom, like that. And most of us, we've not made the connection yet. And these videos on TikTok or whatever else, this is people starting to make those connections. And that is powerful stuff. So we need to dig a bit deeper into our soul, our experiences, our lives, and what is going on in the human brain to start at least removing some of those masks or dealing with some of that trauma.
I mean, so I'm hearing just a really strong connection to trauma and stigma, right, Theo?
Absolutely, yeah. And people think trauma, oh no, I can't do that. Mental health and well-being, oh, I don't want to go near there. But when you start to talk about pressure and a breaking point, right? If you're doing lifting weights and then all of a sudden you go and you pick up a can of beans or can of tuna or whatever from the top shelf and your back goes and you're like, what? It wasn't the tin of beans, it was the weight. Now, it dependent physiologically, it can happen, neurologically, it can happen over a short period of time, long period of time. We got to connect to, it was the weight that pulled the muscle, not the tin of beans. Often we focus on the thing that's right in front of us, and that is not a thing. And by the way, managers, it's the same thing. You've got an employee who goes rah! At you or runs away. It's not the thing you just said. What you need to understand is the thing you just said might have been the breaking point, but you need to be able to take that journey back with that individual to understand what brought them to that breaking point. And that is where you can heal. That's where you can support and help. And I mean, we'll talk more about it, but it's, you know, we shouldn't jump into the solution. We need to understand better the individual that's in front of us, and they need to be understand themselves better as well.
Amazing. Thank you, Theo. Thanks for speaking so openly about it and for talking about your experience. I think hearing about people's experience is just so powerful. And so Sasha, I mean, I'd like to come to you now. And if you're happy doing so, just to tell us a bit more about your experience and how your symptoms present in the workplace. If you're happy to speak about that. It's really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing a lot on the chat about procrastination, which is, I think, a common feature for many of us, particularly with ADHD. And which, as I said, when I worked in high pressure jobs that were time critical, was not an issue, because I know that there's some science that I don't fully understand behind it. But, you know, if you are under pressure, from what I understand, and you have ADHD, you can work very, very well. Self-motivating was becoming a huge problem. Attention to detail is something I have struggled with forever. I did a project management job for about a year, some years back, and it was the worst year of my life because my brain does not work like that. I am a great problem solver. I think outside the box, but I am not organized. And I will say, to some extent, all the tools in the world and, you know, all of the coping mechanisms aren't really going to change me that much in terms of who I am in that sense. Now, the other thing that I was struggling with, and I'm interested in some of the other things we're talking about here on the chat, and apologies, I can't remember the name for it, but I struggle with kind of converting my thoughts onto a page, anything visual. I'm a word person. I really struggle with anything visual. When I was doing a lot of PowerPoint presentations, and I could not get my ideas from my head onto the screen, and I still can't. And that was actually the thing that made me speak up to my manager. And someone had written something on the chat about struggling with directions and getting lost. Again, I don't know if it's ADHD or it's something else, but anything visual, I've always really struggled with. I'm very face blind. I don't recognize people. People say, you know, you've got Google Maps, you should be able to go anywhere. Google Maps to me is like another language. It means nothing. It doesn't matter how good it is. I cannot do it. You know, so all of these things were starting to come together for me. And I really felt like my manager had made a bad decision in employing me. I honestly felt that, but I knew also that I was bringing things to the job that were valuable. And, you know, I've been in my career for 17 years. And I do recognize now that I've always felt very much like, oh, no one's noticed that I've got no idea what I'm doing. No one's noticed that I'm not good at this, but actually I am contributing, and I am, you know, I'm here for a reason. And I'm good at what I do, but you know, I really started to recognize the pockets of places where I was not so good. So yeah. So that, do you want me to talk also about talking to my manager? I don't know.
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, just there's so many people like really connecting with what you've just shared. One person said, I thought it was just me. So I think, again, really powerful telling these personal human stories. You've mentioned your manager, and you mentioned something about you thought your manager made the wrong decision, etc. But we know that your manager has been a real source of support for you, as far as I know. So can you tell us a bit more about that and the role that maybe their empathy and psychological safety and so on has played in this for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my manager does have a very open kind of way that she works. She brings her real self to work. She encourages all of us to do that. We talk about our kids and our lives and, anything that's going on in our lives. And we're always very transparent about it. And that made it much easier to have that conversation. And I cannot stress that enough for anyone on the line who is a manager. All of this, not just neurodiversity, if you want people to be transparent and to tell you what they're struggling with so everybody can do a better job, you have to foster an environment where they feel they can do that. And that really starts, I think, as a manager with yourself and you being transparent. Not everybody wants to talk about everything and their personal life and their medical life in detail at work, but as much as possible, fostering that psychological safety was a massive thing. And once I told her, it was almost seemed crazy to me that I hadn't told her in the first place, and then she's so proactive. Even now, it was months ago, she looks things up, she asks me, what can I help with? She's put some tools in place. I will say one thing that I kind of feel personally, and this may not be the case for everyone, I do think there has to be some give and take. I personally didn't feel that I could go to my manager and say, I've got this problem, just solve it. And, there will be certain roles that perhaps I'm completely unsuited for, and that has to be okay, but to be able to meet in the middle is a really great thing. So what I try very hard not to do is to use it as a excuse to myself almost. I can't do this, I've got ADHD, I can't do that. It's much more for me about understanding why I'm struggling with it and what the solutions are to those things. So that was very much my experience with work. And then and it's an open dialogue. She asked me a question, we talked about memory earlier, and I can't always pick information from my brain that should be there. 5 minutes later, I remember, and I called her back after a call and said, just to explain, I think this might be an ADHD thing, because you asked me these questions and I should know the answer. And it's not that I don't know. My brain doesn't always pull the information out. And it was something I wish I'd known about myself much earlier in my career.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sasha. I mean, it sounds like your manager's doing a lot of things right. We could maybe get some further thoughts on that soon. But I thought, Anthony, let's just bring it back to you for a moment to maybe just speak relatively briefly about some of the best practices for managers and leaders in terms of how they can really be supportive. Would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. I was just reflecting on what everyone else was saying, actually. So again, thank you for your contributions, both of you. I don't know how you guys are managing the chat. I think my brain can't process like speaking and reading all the comments in the chat. So I'll leave that to you guys. That's how my brain works, I think. Anyway, so in terms of best practices or best ways to sort of support individuals in the workplace. So I was thinking about that question, actually, and I think, yes, we should support individuals, as both Theo and Sasha has mentioned. But I think actually for me and actually for Unmind, we take a sort of whole person approach or a whole system approach. It is all well and good, the individual who's experiencing neurodiversity or who's neurodiverse in some way to work on themselves. And yes, we all have responsibility to work on ourselves, whatever the case, whether we're neurodiverse or not. But I think as well, there is also responsibility from organizations, from managers, from colleagues, even from peers, to also better understand what neurodiversity is. Because I guess if one person is doing all the work, it's, and the system itself is not changing, then actually there's a bit of a disconnect, and that person might continually find things to struggle, and we might be unconsciously continuing stigma and all that kind of stuff. So I really liked that give and take approach, Sasha, that you just sort of mentioned. I think that's very true. having said all of that, I think as managers, we're not expected to know every single thing. In the same way, we don't know about everything about diabetes or migraines. We're not going to know everything about autism. But I think, as we've heard from Theo and Sasha, it's the conversations that matter. It's having the confidence and the ability to sort of have that conversation, really, and it needs to take place. So I would say some things that we could do is just making time and space to sort of ask the team if there's any support that they would need, or any ways of working that they would need to perform at their best, basically. So just asking the person, what is it you actually need from us or from me to sort of ensure that you could do your job? And then obviously listening without judgment, asking open questions, all the sort of good manager stuff that we all should know how to do, and trying to better understand people's experience. And I guess what that could look like practically is, flexible hours, allowing people to work at times that suit them, because some people might have to take medication at a certain time that might kick in at a certain time, which would mean they'll be better at a certain time. Just small adaptations like that could be helpful, or remote working. Again, going back to someone who might be autistic, maybe if they have plans in the evening, for example, they might say, actually, let me not come into work on that day because I don't want to burn myself out too much, or vice versa. They can sort of plan their week or plan their day better and know when their energy levels or how the energy levels could be spent better throughout the week. So again, thinking about communication styles. So I guess people might have different preferences in terms of how they wish to be communicated with. So it could be varying how that could be for different people. So for some people, they could prefer written communication. So they can see the information or see the request written down. It gives them a bit of a chance to read it, process it, understand it, and then they can reply in writing. Or others, it could just be verbal and just sort of chit-chatting about the request. And I think same with feedback as well. I think providing clear and constructive feedback is helpful. Not being too vague and just being clear. So I'm thinking about sort of other accommodations that could be made. So for some people, again, sensory stuff could be an issue, not just autism, but people might just need sort of headphones on just to help with their focus, or if they're in a hyper-focus mode, ADHD, having some headphones or noise-cancelling headphones could be helpful, or a quiet workspace where they can just sort of work and focus and do what they need to do. I think it's good for managers to also let staff know, let people know where people can go and get support. So that could be in-house, that could be with them, that could be through the employee assistance program, whatever it is, just letting people know that where they can go to get support and advice. And I think at the same time, it's good for managers to move away from a managing model and move into more of a sort of coaching and supporting type of model, keeping that sort of humanness, just being a human and trying to support someone through something. So I think it's also good to sort of build on strengths and not weaknesses with neurodivergent individuals, but probably with anyone, actually, just focusing on what can be done rather than what can't, what is possible. How can we work together? How can your skills be best used here? Really trying to spend a bit of time just trying to figure things out. I think, as Sasha said, there might be some places where actually it's not suitable for her, but in other areas, she can really flourish and be really sort of amazing and do the job amazingly well. So I will just speak very briefly about just, again, training all employees in neurodiversity as well. I think that's very important. As I said, it's not just the sole responsibility of that sole person. They're a part of a system. And I think it's important for us to remember that. So I'll just finish very quickly with some conversation starters. I've just got a few just to sort of help us think. So some things you could say to your employees is, how can we create a workspace that accommodates your needs and helps you excel? What strategies do you find most effective for managing your workload and tasks? I'm sure there's things that we can all learn. And in fact, there has been colleagues who have shared their strategies with me, and I found it very helpful. What would you like to share? Would you like to share experiences and insights with your team during neurodiversity awareness session? Are there any specific tools or accommodations that you find particularly helpful? And finally, is there anything you would like us to know about your neurodiversity that can help us better support you. So yeah, those are my top tips.
Thanks for sharing all of that, Anthony. I'm sure it's given people some tangible things that they can start to think about and apply themselves. I have a feeling we should have booked like 4 hours for this webinar. I mean, we are running out of time rapidly. There are a few more things I'd love to ask you, but I think let's also honor the questions that have been coming through. So I'm going to take a few minutes to maybe try and pull out a few of the many questions that have come through. I'll ask it openly, and then please, whoever would like to answer it, just take it away. So there's been one or two around diagnosis. So I'll ask this question here. What advice or experience can you share around adults struggling to get a ADHD diagnosis due to NHS waiting times? So private diagnosis is more difficult in Scotland as GPs don't accept the diagnosis prescriptions. Lots of people in my network finding this incredibly difficult. So how can people navigate diagnosis and not being able to get one? Is anyone anything to share on that?
Just very quickly, from a parental perspective, I've been there. It took 4 years to get my daughter diagnosed autistic and ADHD. It was tough. It was a battle, and it was focused on waiting lists. We've now heard from the support organisations that help with diagnosis that they've stopped waiting lists. They've put a hold to them because they're too long. They're going beyond 5 years. So this is a real problem. Not just in the UK, but globally, because even if you do get a diagnosis, even if you're in a place in the world where you can get that, because it's not possible everywhere, you then may not even get the support you're looking for. So actually the diagnosis was almost just like a tick in a box. Do you want drugs? Do you not want drugs? You don't. See you later. There's nothing else we can do from a medical perspective from the NHS, because it's the medical model versus the social model, right? And we don't do nothing about a social model. So then we had to get an EHCP, Educational Health and Care Plan, which took us even longer again, to then enforce by law our legal right to support within the education system. So the advice I would give you is to join local communities, find groups, Facebook groups, find other groups where other people have gone through that experience, because you'll learn a lot from those experiences and individuals. And there's plenty of resources as well available to help you on that process. But the reality is, in the current system that we have, and it's not looking like it's getting better anytime soon, it's a long and painful process that's a lot of form filling, which isn't accessible for people like me who are dyslexic. Luckily, my partner's not, therefore it was easier for her to fill out all the forms that we're required to advocate for ourselves. And the questions are not clear and concise either, which makes it even more confusing for somebody who may see things more specifically than so the questions are not right. Same challenges our children have in schools, within the exam systems. It's the way the questions are asked that are causing them significant problems that mean they're not achieving what they should do within those environments. I mean, people can come and try and contact me if they want. I'm probably going to regret that, but if they want some more guidance and they want me to signpost them to some areas that may help from a parental perspective, because I've been through that journey myself.
Thank you so much, Theo. Thank you. I'm going to try and get through a few more questions here, but covering some really important stuff there. So, Sasha, I'm going to direct this one to you. It's to you. So, Sasha, how did you overcome that feeling of imposter syndrome when you reveal that you might have ADHD to colleagues and managers? The person to them feels that it's easy for people to think that we're just jumping on the bandwagon. Is there anything that you can say to that, Sasha?
I felt less imposter syndrome once I told them, because before that I had been feeling like I just wasn't as good as everybody else. But once I was diagnosed, it was completely the opposite. I felt empowered. There was no imposter. I mean, I still get imposter syndrome, but I understand now why I feel the way I do, what my limitations are, what my strengths are. And, you know, I've also been able to have reassurance from my manager where I have apologized for things. And she says, Sasha, I don't even notice when you do that. So actually, I would say it's completely the opposite experience for me.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Sasha. There have been a few questions around accommodations. I want to ask this one, which I think it's obviously a manager's experience. With the culture of hybrid working from home / office, how can I provide accommodations to someone who I suspect has autism and refuses to come into the office. I want to encourage them to attend and join in ad hoc team collaboration activities where I feel their skills could add real value to the team. So yeah, would love to just get some honest perspective on this.
Okay, yeah, you go ahead, Theo.
Right.
You've
Right.
lived experience, so your experience is more valuable.
No, I'll quickly. We shouldn't be looking to diagnose people, right? We shouldn't be looking to enforce them to share experiences that they're not comfortable sharing, because there is still significant bias, right? The amount of stories I've heard of somebody saying, "Okay, yeah, I'm autistic," and then that being used against them, ultimately, and them potentially losing their job. So I'd always urge caution around insisting that somebody like self-diagnoses or puts their hand up. Because it's not, you may think it's safe, but their community, they may not be. I've heard of people who can't go home and talk about it in their community because of the negative reception they're going to get. Therefore, to open up in the work environment when they can't open up in their community, you're asking a lot from them. And just because you feel they'd have a lot to add into that environment doesn't mean that is good for them. And therefore enforcing them to do that might have an effect, a negative effect on their mental health, their well-being, and their ability to contribute. So why not find an alternative way that they can contribute that works for them? Because ultimately the best way for them to contribute might be after the event rather than during the event, where there can be too much stimulation, energy levels can be too high, too difficult to get your word in. And therefore, if you have a chance to receive all of that information, consolidate that information, then have an opportunity to bring it back in a way that you feel comfortable, I think there's much more value in that. However, the caveat is I understand that every environment, every job, every way of working is different. So there's also the understanding of, is that the right job for them as well? Is it getting the best out of them? Is it helpful to them? Are they already significantly struggling based on what's required as well? So we've always got to think about the balance there. It's not as simple as to say, we do X, Y, or Z.
Thank you, Theo. Okay, so we have 7 minutes left, but I would like to ask maybe one or two more questions from the Q&A before wrapping things up. This question, I think, looks at it through a different perspective here. So I am autistic and new to managing people. You've talked a lot about managing neurodiverse people, but not the other way around. Do you have any tips on how this person, for example, can manage in general?
Yeah, I think it's
sorry, go on.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's an interesting one. It's so they're autistic themselves and they're inquiring about how to manage others. I think as Theo said, it's about if they wish to sort of disclose, that's sort of up to them in some ways, isn't it? It's for them to sort of make that sort of decision. And I think it's about helping them to understand themselves as best possible. What does this new diagnosis mean for them? Because I guess it's new for them, potentially, even though they've lived with it for years. I guess it's helping them to understand what is autism and what does autism mean for them effectively, and what adaptations do they need to make for themselves for them to be able to be the best managers that they could be. So I think it does sort of start with them, and then from there it could be thinking, how can the team facilitate and support that sort of new diagnosis and also support that manager as well. So again, it's what adaptations need to be made and how can it be communicated and in what format to others. Sasha, did you have comments as well?
Well, obviously, I have no expertise whatsoever on autism, but I was going to just say from the ADHD perspective exactly what you said: transparency, not just neurodiversity. I'm a big believer as a teammate, as a manager, anything that you should be transparent about something you feel is holding you back or affecting your behavior to the extent that you are comfortable to do that. I think that people understanding other people as humans is the key.
Yeah, and also it's that sort of stigma element, isn't it? Whilst no one has to sort of disclose, I guess if people do, I guess it sort of chips away at the stigma. Hopefully, they can sort of speak them up and ultimately it's an individual decision for that person to make the decision for themselves if it's right for them. But yeah, I'd agree.
Thank you both. there's so many more questions which we're not going to have a chance to get to now. I mean, I will speak to the team. Perhaps we can look through all those questions and maybe send out like a report or something to all guests after this. Hopefully the team's not going to be upset that I've just said that, but I think we can do something like that. We have a few minutes left. I'm going to give the three of you just maybe 1 minute each. There's so much more that we could have covered that I'm sure you wanted to cover, but what would you like to say, your final words that you feel is important to leave the audience with? Anthony, I'll start with you. So 1 minute, take it away.
Okay. Final words. I mean, it's been a real pleasure just to sort of speak, because I think my whole role is to sort of reduce stigma and increase awareness of certain things. So the fact there are people here and are interested, I think it is showing, to me anyway, that things are changing and times are changing and people are becoming more interested in the world around them and difference and mental health and all these things that we kind of talk about. So I think for me, it's just to encourage people to sort of keep the conversation going and to sort of, for people to sort of keep attending these sort of webinars, keep learning, because there's so much to sort of learn about and grow into. And yeah, even me as a professional, psychologist, I have to sort of, learn about these things and also see how it changes over time. So I'd really encourage people to sort of keep learning, keep going. We have things on our platform that can be helpful. There's things on our website that's helpful, as well as, various other mediums. So yeah, and also just to thank everyone again for sort of attending. It's great to see so many people, and yeah.
Thank you, Anthony. Sasha, your final few words.
Sure. I think I was fortunate enough to be asked questions that really gave all my messages anyway. But I'm big on authenticity and understanding individuals for whatever it is that is putting pressure on them at any given time or makes them behave in a certain way. So for me, it's about transparency to the extent that you are comfortable, understanding yourself, being empowered by what you know about yourself. But also, as I said, on the flip side, recognizing that does mean looking at ways to adapt, looking at how you turn those limitations into the very best version of yourself, and so that you become kind of at peace with it, I suppose is the best thing, that it, as I say, that it becomes an empowerment and not a limitation.
Thank you so much, Sasha. Yeah.
So communication is key, the way that we communicate, and it's two ways, right? No surprise. So when we think about words, letters, words, sentences, algorithms, numbers, when we build these things, they're recipes. If we get an ingredient wrong, it's going to taste different. If we think about our communication in that context, how is the other person receiving that? How does that communication taste for that individual, right? And this is around empathy, patience, consideration. We need to listen, we need to learn, and then we need to support, right? And that's really key. If we're going to solution building for individuals, that doesn't feel inclusive. That's not like a partnership. And the best partnerships I've seen from manager and employee is when the employee and the manager have gone away and learned more about the topic, about one another, and brought it back to the table and gone, hey, I've read this, what do you think? Not, I've read this, why don't we try this? But I learned this, what do you think? And that journey and exploration allows you to understand more about one another without having to go, are you autistic? Yes, I am. And maybe there is a point where that happens, right? Because of the trust, but we need to come back here and start to explore those ideas, those concepts together. And that is, and the success I've seen at managers, employees, team members that do that, that really does bridge the gap that will only get bigger if you don't approach it in that way. So that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, so thank you, Theo. Thank you, Sasha. Thank you, Anthony, for your invaluable contributions. People have clearly resonated with it and really found lots of value in it. I think there's certainly room for more conversation moving forward. So to all the attendees, thank you also for joining us today and for being so engaged and active in the chat and asking your questions. And let's keep the conversation going and I guess collectively work towards creating more inclusive workplaces for everyone. So until our next webinar, which hopefully we'll see you all on, thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful day and goodbye.